Thank you. Aha. Yes, I do, thanks. I really dislike metaphors, but allow me to begin with one. If customer accounts were cars, the world would look like this. If a customer accounts were oil, the world would look like this. It's time to clean up the environment. And I guess a lot of us in the identity world have known that for quite a long time. But what's interesting now is that many organizations, enterprises worldwide also understand it. So, for example, when I work, in my work at Microsoft, I work in the side of Microsoft. Microsoft is one of these massive things that does every possible thing. The area where I work in is essentially dealing with enterprise organizations. Now, if you think about it, enterprises are the people who interact with consumers. So enterprises are connected to consumers very directly. And we, as people who provide technology to enterprises, have been under a barrage of questions and so on about when we will be able to help people reduce the risks in dealing with their own customers. So you read in the press, about the difficulties and the inabilities of enterprises to protect their customer data. I think the good news here is that in general, enterprises are aware of it. Now, on the other hand, enterprises don't want to do anything whatsoever to reduce their ability to interact with their customer base or to attract new customers or to be able to become as close as possible to their customers. So it's a contradiction that has to be wielded, and it is really, in my view, a question of professionalizing identity. Now, when I talk about that, what I really mean is that, if you go back 10 years and even look at present systems, a lot of them have been built by people who have really no expertise in the kinds of threats that one now faces on the internet, or the kinds of attacks that can be made by insiders or by outsiders. The whole fabric of identity has been built I would say by amateurs. It's an area which is just increasingly complicated, which requires tremendous amount of expertise. And so one of the things that Microsoft and a number of other companies in the industry have been doing is trying to set up identity management as a service, which would be run in a much more professional fashion and would have all of the infrastructural characteristics that allow for protection from insiders and allow analysis of botnets and all of the kinds of threats that you can detect when you're dealing with the internet from the point of view of a provider that has really massive information, massive signals coming in from the internet about where attackers are located. So, for example, our product is, it's called Azure AD, and it's identity management as a service for organizations. And I would like everyone to really understand, and I don't think it is understood at all, that we and our competitors are not building the equivalents of consumer identity systems. We are building something completely different in the sense that we see each enterprise as owning its own information. We don't see the information that is within these systems as something that can be mined by Microsoft or can be accessed by our systems. So we think of it as millions of independent identity systems controlled by the enterprises and government tenants who use it. Now, to give you an idea of where this has come to, we currently have more than 5 million organizations worldwide who have moved their account management, at least partially, into this identity system. We do more than 1 billion authentications every day. 86% of the Fortune 500 companies are involved in this, and a much higher percentage in the Global 2000 and so on. So we're really not talking about hypotheticals. We're talking about something which I think from the point of view of the economics of identity is very important, which is no matter what identity services are being offered, the key to making money on them is having them connect into the enterprises that require that identity information. We always used to talk about in the early days of the identity movement, what is the economic model, blah, blah, blah. The economic model to me is fairly simple. It's service providers, relying parties, progressively need to get closer to their customers, obtain more information, and are willing to pay for it, whether it be governments or private enterprises. So the market is driven from the service provider. And therefore, the connectivity into the service provider, the delivery mechanism into the service provider is key. I talk about the massive size of entities like Active Directory, and I certainly don't mean to imply that that makes us more important than other players in the system. The identity problem is only solved by an ecology. The ecology includes, mobile, and it includes all kinds of, I believe, the social providers as well. It includes people who have biometrics. It includes all kinds of new devices that will come. But all of these components of this technology have to get delivered into the service provider in order to realize their value. And when I say delivered in, I mean connected into all of the existing systems that are there and that are really hard to connect into. And so that's why I think the notion of having an infrastructure that is open-ended on the outside but allows you to connect in to the enterprises and government departments and so on is a key characteristic that we require. So the newest trend in all of this is, in this sort of whole question of professionalization, is professionalization of B2c. So the idea here is that organizations can dramatically reduce risk around loss of data or identity theft and everything else, dramatically reduce cost, and reduce complexity. Complexity, of course, is one of the main causes of security vulnerabilities. They can handle all their different customer relationships within a consistent framework. So we can't end up in a situation where enterprises are forced to have separate technologies for dealing with mobiles and dealing with socials and dealing with all of these other sources of or inputs, identity inputs. That will be extremely hard problem for the enterprises to navigate. The ideal here is that we have a consistent framework that allows all of these things to be delivered in such a way that people can choose what's appropriate for each situation. We also need, in this B2C, the incredible thing about the B2C is it ends up presenting the idea of a consumer system dramatically larger than any existing consumer system. So for example, you could take Facebook and its billions of users, or Hotmail. Our Hotmail has 800 million active users and so on. But the important thing there is that if you take all of the B2C in the world, it's all 3 billion people in the world dealing with all, as the world digitalizes, dealing with all of the digital entities that they're dealing with. So you're up into trillions times hundreds in terms of the size of the consumer identity system that arises out of the overall relationship around B2C identity. So I won't go into this in detail, but it's important for people to understand that B2C is completely unlike traditional enterprise identity. If you think of the way we treat our employees digitally and the way we treat our customers digitally, you can drill into the fact that actually the underlying requirements are completely different. And B2C requires, above all else, that the ability to customize the customer's identity experience to what is right for whatever they're doing. And that'll be really different. I like the comment from one of the speakers on the panel that not only would it require two different technologies, but it would require them for different, in fact, it might even require them for different, the same entity could be using both different opposed technologies because it could be responding to 2 different identity experiences. And so what we have done is to produce what we call an identity experience engine that is driven by trust framework policies. So the model here is that you have an engine which is completely, shall I say, Catholic in terms of the capabilities that it embraces. In other words, it doesn't, the engine itself doesn't take sides of any kind. And then you have authors who create trust frameworks, and the trust frameworks control the engine so that it provides the behaviors and does all of the heavy lifting, guarantees the security, guarantees the privacy, guarantees that things are in accordance with the what the goals of the enterprise. So we call them trust framework policies in the sense that they concretize the technical concepts of OIX trust frameworks. Now, trust frameworks have many, they're fundamentally legal agreements. They're fundamentally agreements about goals and liabilities and guarantees and so on. But in order to actually make those things possible in the world of molecules and even the digital world, you need to have a concretization of those things through technical policies that implement the legal policies. Now, the components of the trust of these trust framework policies include things like which claims providers you accept, what relying parties you allow in, what user journeys you support. I don't know what happened to my slide here. It seems to have had difficulty adjusting to this screen. and so on. And all of the visuals and experiential components are in this column called building blocks. So imagine that this engine can create any set of experiences, interact not only with a single, say a single identity provider, but allow multiple identity providers to be connected together. So you might pick up some information from one, some information from another, etc. That's what we call mashable flows. The content definitions are all of the visuals and so on, so that you can do the kinds of things that Verify did, beautiful thing, where they were helping to choose which identity provider was right for you. Or the idea of bringing your own identity, and so on, with attribute providers and attribute verifiers. So it's really an infrastructure that allows all those things to be plugged in with minimum muss and fuss. In other words, an enterprise can go and say, I want to add that to my system and do it within a few minutes. And if you produce a standards-based identity provider or identity verifier or any of those things, you can actually be part of that. And I want to point out here that trust frameworks apply at many different levels. One is at just a single application. So we chose not to bifurcate between big complicated sets of entities and a single entity. In all cases, they have a policy because they need to know what they're doing and what they're applying. So it can apply to a single application, it can apply to a single organization, a complex organization with many divisions, and it needs to be able to be refined so that each division might take the base policy and then tweak it in various ways. So it applies to horizontal sets of organizations, vertical sets, and so on. The other thing to think about is I believe that the identity experience engine operator can be a completely different entity, just a pure technology entity, whereas the trust framework operator has to be the entity that is trusted, that really is trusted and runs all of the framework, the business legal, the social, is the public face of the thing. So that the identity experience operator is really just, it's a white labeled set of technology which lives in the background and means that somebody who wants to set up a trust framework doesn't have to absorb all the risk of building one, the tremendous risk of building a technical risk of building one. So what we've done is we've packaged this up into two products. One is basic, which sort of any Tom, Dick, and Harry can deploy in a matter of minutes, but nonetheless cleans up the bottom level of the ecology, so that we don't have passwords leaking out at that level. And and some of the entities that have been using this are, for example, the Real Madrid football team, which wants to go to 450 million fans. And it's important here to think that even though they're just a soccer team, what do they actually want to sell? They want to sell video content, and so therefore it's actually a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. I will just do a very, how long do I have now? 5 minutes, okay, and that we still have, yeah, okay. So I'll just give you just a super brief little micro demo. Play video, do I push the button? So this is my blog, and I'm going to show you, first of all, the policy, the trust framework policy for people who want to comment. So they go and they press login, and they're given a NASGAR opportunity to choose what they want. I'm going to choose Google here in my little demo. And this takes me to Google is just an example of an identity provider that is connected into the framework. I enter in my Google credentials. I sign in, and there we are. I'm now able to, I'm logged in as kcameron@orange.fr, and I can now post comments to the site. You'll see I have no other power. Now my site has been broken into hundreds of times, so I'm going to show you now the administrator experience. The administrator experience is I go to login, and I'm going to, this is using a different policy, the admin policy. And I've chosen to use Facebook, and you're going to go, are you really trusting Facebook for your admin of your blog that is being attacked all the time? And yeah, I am. You can see me doing it. However, I've set up the policy so that if you pass the Facebook troll, you're asked for your SMS. So here it comes. Now I have to, it's going to come and send me a code. And so really the Facebook is just a mechanism sort of for launching. And so what this is really showing is the combination of two identity providers, the SMS identity provider and the Facebook identity provider. Used together, it's actually a fairly strong service for me. And what's important there is I don't need to trust Facebook's two-factor authentication. Now, that's a silly example. It's just, you know, for my blog, but my blog is very important to me, and I like to flog my blog. And the important thing here is now having used the two-factor, I can come in and I can see all my posts, and I can do all the damage and so on. What I'm trying to share with you, friends, is this notion that we need to think of identity as a bunch of policies that we call trust framework policies that can be very, very different from each other, involve different user journeys, different visual experiences, different amounts of different types of interactions with customers, and use the right ones at the right points in time, and then mash up and combine all of the components of the ecology and give all of the people in the ecology access into the enterprise through something which steps into it. Here's the identity experience engine, and you can see it sort of works this way. You do in this particular one, you do a selection, then you choose something. It actually stores the result in the consumer directory. It does the SMS, and so on. I won't go into the details. I think that gives you the idea. I showed you the basic SKU. The premium SKU allows you to do absolutely, you can do anything you want to do, including protocol conversions between SAML OAuth and OpenID connect into any different kind of entity, run a hub, blah, blah, blah. And I'll give you an example here. This is sort of from one of the collaborations. It's very exciting to be in England because of the fact that Verify has adopted the OIX model and is a perfect example of a trust framework along the lines that I'm discussing. And of course, the Verify trust framework can be integrated into other user experiences that might be going and getting attributes from inside, say, a local government, or connecting into different internal systems and supplementing the claims with things from hospitals and so on. So, yeah, I think that's the basic concept, that we're in the age. I think Microsoft has laid down the gauntlet now with this notion of making trust framework-based identity mainstream. It's already been adopted by something in the order of 50 or 60,000 enterprises, and it isn't a released product yet. So that the hunger for to solve these kinds of problems is really big, and the advantage here is not for Microsoft per se, it's for the ecology as a whole, which will have a channel into the existing computer systems of the world, really. Thank you. Well, thank you.
Yourself. Well, we've got about 10 minutes, the opportunity to ask Kim some questions. So I want to do the first one, open it up to the floor before we go into the break. Thank you, sir. Microphone will just come to you.
Hello, I'm Ian from Orange County Council. I've been doing quite a lot of work on what you touched on at the end, which is actually an exchange moving information between organisations to prove entitlement or eligibility for service, which I think is where the real transformational possibility is. I think that moves the whole trust argument on one step, really. So rather than becoming simply trust between an organisation and a customer, the other organisations come into the trust nexus, if you like, in the ecosystem. And I just wonder if you can say a little bit about how you're working at Microsoft to ensure that customer-centred transactions can be trusted equally by two separate organisations who may be required to show entitlement for a service.
Basically, the concept would be that we wouldn't do that at Microsoft. The trust framework operator would set up his policies such that that was the outcome. So, for example, they would both be sending to, say, the same subset of entities using the same levels of assurance and claim verification and so on, and you would set up policies like that, and then both of those enterprises could consume that trust framework that sets up the big parameters and say, we conform to that framework. Just as you could have them make an alliance with another trust framework so that the two trust frameworks can actually share capabilities, or at least be used in policies that are appropriate for that type of interaction. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So essentially it becomes a shared view of assurance.
Yes, and making that a shared view of assurance that is provable, because the policy is there. Furthermore, we've made it so that the policy, you can choose to make your policy crowd certifiable, if you want, to make the auditing of your policy can be done publicly. So you can say, so for example, it has many privacy capabilities, for example. But have you really set up those privacy capabilities? If you really have privacy capabilities, you can say, not only do we have them, but we've made our policy auditable so that people like Privacy International or whoever it would be could come in and have a service that verifies that these people really are doing what they say they are, and so on. So we actually, I think these are really exciting opportunities for us. And another way to increase trust is to have these shared trust policies that are auditable and crowd auditable.
Thank you very much for the question. Any other questions? This gentleman just there in the fish.
Simon Dean Johns. I'm a lawyer specialising in all this sort of stuff. I'm just intrigued to know your view on whether an individual's identity assurance choices, could be constrained via the sort of infrastructure, if you like, of a few technological choke points, such as app stores. Do you think they will affect or could dictate ID assurance solutions?
App stores. This is a great question, okay. And I've been involved in developing this technology for the last 5 or 6 years. The big issue for me inside Microsoft was, are we just going to have the basic SKU, which is all locked down, and you go in and everything you do is constrained? Or are we going to deliver freedom, where people can create what they want? And so I would urge you to be on the outlook for that. You know, the industry must be required to deliver open-ended mechanisms whereby anybody can actually set up a trust framework. Anybody can, and you know, of course, some will be much more successful than others. You know, we know that. And where it's very easy for them to take advantage of the ecology. It's not expensive. So I believe that that the competition, okay, and so this is one of those things. To what extent must everything be legislated? Well, I believe that protecting people from harm should be legislated, but the actual way in which these technologies are used should just be allowed to grow organically. Then as long as you have intelligent commentators in the environment, as in England you have no shortage, then you know, you're going to get the right outcomes.
Fantastic. And then just time for one more question just at the front here, before we conclude this session.
I wonder what your thoughts were on the current consultation by the House of Lords on the digital single market. We gave evidence last week, and there was quite a big concern about coalition of power under a small number of platforms. The GAFAT Alliance, I think, was the phrase that was used. Didn't include Microsoft. So.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sorry, David Alexander, Chief Executive of MIDEX, a community interest company.
Ah, MIDEX.
Bless you for that.
No, I love MIDEX. Okay. Yes, one is always worried about these things, okay? But of course, I also... so that's a question of democratizing the technology. And of making the barrier to entry lower. I didn't show you, like, the costs. Here, just... I guess I don't have... Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, I didn't bring this because I'm selling anything, okay? I've never sold anything. I've never really done a presentation about a product before. But just look at the costs of this thing. I mean, you know, it's like you're talking about, you know, 0.001 cents a transaction. So, and this is with extremely high security infrastructure. And we still make money. So it's got a tremendous democratization. Now, should Microsoft be running these things? Well, you know, I think in Europe you can apply pressure so that this technology could be run by people of your choice. Or they can write their own technology, but I mean, Microsoft has no hesitation to allow other people to run the technology. So, but are we worried? Would I be worried as an individual? Yes, I'm always worried about these things. Okay, I'm worried about, for example, one of the main initiatives in this was to take privacy-enhancing technology and make it a fundamental part of the engine. So it has zero knowledge. To turn on zero knowledge transactions, you just, you know, move a lever 1/4 of an inch. And now you've got zero knowledge. So I didn't make it a privacy technology. I just said, okay, this is a security. Similarly, there's a high security end. You move it a 1/4 of an inch in the other direction, and it'll staple all of your transactions together, so that you don't have any possibility of man in the middle. You can always do an audit and make sure that everything was signed properly. But you know, you want the system to be. The technology provider should be. What's the word? You know. I've been very sick, so I apologize for my speaking style today. But it's none of our business really. It's really a social question, how the trust frameworks are being written and run. But what we've done is made it democratic, and I believe that the rest of, always in my experience as a technologist, whenever I've done anything even remotely good, all of our competitors have done the same thing. So I believe that this will become a sort of a benchmark standard for the way people have to deliver these things. And so that produces really a lot of openness in terms of the way that people can get the outcomes they want.
Thank you, Kim. So last call to arms for our people today. We've heard a lot in terms of open source, commentable opportunities, and the market will choose then the ones that are successful. Anything else that you want to challenge our audience with today to think about and consider just before we close this morning session?
Well, not really. I think we have to move from trusting identity providers to trusting an identity experience engine that does the things needed for your specific scenario. That's a huge fundamental paradigm shift. A single identity provider it won't get us to the next stage. We will not break out of Earth orbit on that basis, because what's required really are these, as the gentleman said, the ability to share sideways, up and down, crossways, mash, all of those kinds of things, and that requires it. So I'd urge you just to think about that paradigm shift and what it implies for your business model.